Hello, everybody. This is Ashish Shankar from Synergip, your host for today's webinar. Our topic today is Grassroots Kanban. And one of the things I like about today's topic is it gives you a sort of a roadmap of how you could drive adoption of agile practices and Kanban or other practices, grassroots approach by producing outcomes and driving adoption. And we'll talk a little bit more about that topic in a little bit. I just wanted to cover a few housekeeping items first. So this webinar is available or is being recorded right now and would be available on our YouTube channel. You can go to our website www.synergip.com and look for Agile TV, and this should show up in that list. The other thing, and I think it should show up in about 24 to 48 hours from this event. Another thing I wanted to point you out to is that at any time you have a question, you should post that question on the through the questions tab, and we want to make it very interactive. And as these questions come in, we'd be happy to pause a little bit and give you some answers. There is the presentation itself is expected to run for about 45 minutes or so, and so we will have about 10 minutes after the presentation concluded towards more Q&A and discussion and so on. So so hopefully this was going to be a good interactive and very stimulating session for everybody. So as mentioned, this topic at hand is Grassroots Kanban, and the basic premise of today's conversation is how do practitioners and drive adoption of software development when there may or may not be a strong mandate from the executive teams to indeed do so. The speaker today is Jay Paulson. Jay is a Kanban evangelist as well as a coach and mentor for Kanban processes within DrillingInfo, and the primary driver of sort of a viral adoption for Kanban practices in DrillingInfo over the past several years. So without much ado, I do want to hand it over to Jay. I want to also highlight that as part of his push towards Kanban, he has built an open source tool called Lean Sheets, and this is something you're welcome to check out online. I believe the URL is Lean Sheets. And so with that quick introduction, it's over to Jay.
Thanks, Ashish. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. Today, I guess we're going to be talking about how I implemented Kanban at DrillingInfo. So let's get started. A little bit about myself. I have been in software engineering for over 15 years, and I've had about 5 years or more of implementing Kanban at different places, such as startups, IBM, eBay, and now DrillingInfo. I've trained with David Anderson. He's the founder of Kanban for software development. He wrote a blue book you'll hear in the community. It's called the Blue Bible. It's called Kanban, Evolutionary Approach to Change. Super great book. He wrote it in 2010. Highly recommend picking up that book, reading it. I've read it several times, did book clubs on it. Very good book. I started in DrillingInfo back in November of 2014, so about a year and a half ago. And if you would like to follow me on Twitter, I do tweet some stuff at PaulSJV. My LinkedIn is there. And then I'm also speaking at the Lean Kanban North American conference this May out in San Diego on this topic as well. So that's a great conference to go to. If you can make it, I would love to meet you there. So a little bit about DrillingInfo. It's in the oil and gas industry. It was founded back in 1999 and is still currently privately held, and it's a $100 million a year business. And what we do is we basically gather a whole bunch of data from public sources and private sources, and then kind of massage that data and then offer it up to various customers, from small mom and pop shops to huge Halliburton type of companies. We have about 500 employees and about 40 software engineers, and that's broken up into contractors that are overseas. Here in Austin, there's some people in Denver. There's some people over in California. So we're pretty much all over the place with it, and we use a couple of tools to kind of track our progress. And one is Rally. Pretty much everybody's in Rally except for some IT people, and they're using Jira. And then some teams have chosen to use physical boards, and we'll kind of get into how does it work to track things in physical boards and also in the electronic tools. So what I like to talk about at the beginning is kind of the appropriateness of when is it not appropriate to do Kanban. So before I started DrillingInfo, I was coming from a startup that had a very low maturity aspect on it, and really these are the aspects or attributes that were kind of there. It was funny because I was taking the master class from David Anderson, and he was going over this list with the class, and he said, you know, some of the low maturity organizations are impatient, stressed, they have very low trust, and they have no or poor risk management, and there's a big lack of alignment between vision, strategy, and action, and also a lack of alignment between strategy and the capability of the engineering team. And they have superstitious behaviors, and they're revolutionary and not evolutionary. And so I raised my hand and I said, well, you know, what would you recommend if you were in this organization? And he was like, well, you might want to look for something else because you won't be there long, because you won't not necessarily be able to do Kanban, but you won't be able to do any type of process at all. And that company, that was so true, because that company, before I started, they were doing about 20 items per engineer, and the team was about 6 people. And their average lead time, or how long it took things to get done, was about 68 business days. And the executive team was very, very frustrated with their team. And so they hired me and a new CTO to kind of come in and help them refine how they get things done. But the evolutionary approach and the revolutionary approach, so what you kind of want to look for is you want to see a kind of a humbled organization, and you want to see a more mature organization, and you want to stay away from the arrogant and grand gestures, great victories, or heroes. And a prime example was at the company that I was at before. They were working about 120 hours a week. People were missing vacations. They were missing the birth of their children, and a lot of just bad stuff. It wasn't sustainable at all. And I was bringing in an approach that kind of gave a data point to help them manage the risk and go kind of more the sustainability agenda, so they wouldn't lose their talent and they could actually understand what the capability of their teams were. So the other thing that yes?
Yeah, if I may interrupt you for a moment, one question that has sort of popped up is, when you say superstitious behavior, if you could give a quick example of that, what does it really mean?
So an example was that if we don't do this work, we're going to lose the account and we're going to go out of business. That was kind of a theme for pretty much any customer, and it was used to try to make their work go through the system faster and deprioritize other work that may have been even more important. And so the cost was very high, because we would have pretty much on a daily basis, the whole company would come to the stand-up of about 30 people. And I remember several times I was having to have very hard talks with everybody in the company at the daily stand-ups about, you know, what decision do we want to make? How are we going to move forward? If this is that important, how are we going to delay everything else? And that was a very superstitious behavior, because they thought that that was going to happen every single time. When in fact, when you talk about it, the customers were actually okay with a little bit of a delay. They weren't expecting everything to come out all at the same time.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
So the principles of Kanban, these have kind of been evolved over time since about 2010 from the worldwide community of the Kanban practitioners. And I really take the first one very, very seriously, is start with what you do now. And that approach is to kind of not meet the resistance and flow like water around all the rocks. So when you meet resistance, we call that a rock. And you don't want to push on the rock because usually the rock pushes back harder. So what you want to do is you want to flow around it. So it was very important to me that whenever I was talking about Kanban, I wasn't talking about coming in and revolutionizing how they were doing their work. I was saying, let's start with what you do now. Let's understand what you're doing now so we can make sure that we can continue doing that as take a more of a scientific approach with an hypothesis and some metrics around that hypothesis and see if the change actually had a desired effect that we were expecting. And if it did, we'll keep it, and if not, we'll roll back to to how we were doing it before. There's a lot of misconceptions, I know, because I've talked to a lot of companies here in Austin, that if I'm a Kanban person, I'm going to come in and I'm going to totally change the company culture and I'm going to totally revolutionize how they're doing their work, and that's not the case at all. It's a very it's techniques mainly to help improve the team's current way of doing their work, and it provides the data you need in order to make those changes and know that they're having the desired effect. The second principle is agree to pursue evolutionary change, and this is more the scientific approach that I spoke about just a second ago, and it's really empowering the team and to kind of point out the things that they're seeing that could be improved upon, and then having a team discussion. And I like to have those discussions at stand-up. And so if the team wants to have a talk about a possible improvement, we usually have a bucket like where we put everything in. And then after the stand-up, we would go through that bucket and we would talk about it as a team. And the people who want to be there and a part of the discussion, they would stay. And those that didn't would leave and go back to whatever they were doing before. And then 3 is initially respect current processes, roles, responsibilities, and job titles. This is totally key, because if you change people's job titles or roles, they're more likely going to leave the company. A great example of this is when I was at CA Technologies, the executives decided to change all the QA engineers to software engineers. And they had a whole bunch of engineers, the QA engineers leave the company, and they were all like, why did they leave? We don't know why we left. Well, come to find out, those QA engineers did not want to be software engineers. They wanted to be QA engineers. So that one's super important. And the approach that I take is to coach people into new responsibilities and take, again, the evolutionary change and give them small incremental changes to their job to get them to a better place. And number 4 is encourage active leaderships at every level in your organization, from individual contributor all the way through senior management. And that's super important. And the way I describe this is people need to speak up and speak their minds in a respectful way, obviously, because if you don't have people speaking up and saying what they feel as though would be an improvement, you're not going to make the improvements that you're going to want to make to get to where you want to be. So where did I start here at DrillingInfo? Well, I was lucky enough to be hired on as a software development manager and be able to do Kanban on my team. And so I was able to purchase physical boards, put the stickies up. I put them right outside one of the conference rooms. I sat outside of that conference room, so when people stopped by the boards and were looking at it, I could have a discussion with them and tell them the benefits of Kanban. And one of the things that I was talking about was a board game called Get Kanban. And Get Kanban was a board game that was invented by an Australian, and he sells it online at getkanban.com. And I started playing it with I played it with my team first to kind of get the basics of how does Kanban even work. And then that was super popular, and it kind of gained traction, and I started doing it for other teams, and that led to having a monthly corporate training session playing this game, and I created a whole 3-hour training session with slides that kind of go in parallel with the Get Kanban game. And then after we played the game, if the team was interested, I had a follow-up 2 to 4 hour workshop, depending on the size of the team and how much they wanted to debate about their boards. But it helped facilitated their Kanban board creation. And I use an approach called static, which is systems thinking approach to implementing Kanban. And you can go on any search engine and search for that, and you can read a whole bunch about it. But it's basically 7 to 8 steps that you take in order to create a board and roll it out. And then once we figured out what all the policies were, what the states of works were, and kind of looked at their current data to figure out what their work in process limits were, we created their physical boards. And sometimes it was, in Rally as well, or it was whiteboards and whatnot. And the other thing we started to do was track 3 additional metrics. So I didn't change any metrics that they were gathering to start with. I added the lead time metrics. So when you start work and I tracked the delivery rate. How much work is coming out of your system for a given period of time, a week, a month, a quarter, a year. And we also started tracking work in progress limits to make sure that the team was respecting those limits, because what we were finding is that teams were doing a ton of work and they were having many context switches, and that was just killing the productivity of the teams. And so we started limiting the work in process, which actually went to the mantra of stop starting, start finishing, and we were able to get a higher throughput and a lower lead time, which helped a ton. So on my team,
if I may interrupt you for one more. So I'm seeing now questions sort of flow in, and this is great. I just want to also remind the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to post it on the questions tab. So the question that's kind of come in is, when you talk about the delivery, if you go to the previous slide, when you talk about delivery rate, do you actually put in any prescriptions around how to measure delivery rate? I mean, did you require the teams to now start breaking down things into user stories or any other artifacts that that you would now measure to look at delivery rates, or did you simply use whatever was already in place?
So like I stated at the beginning, I started with what they had, and what they were currently doing is where I started. But I would make suggestions and recommendations and let the team decide what they wanted to do. But kind of my philosophy is more the feature-driven development. So I want to create a feature that when it's done, it can be picked up by the customer and start using. I don't want to do half the feature and then not have the customer be able to use it, because there may be a higher priority item come in, and then you have to switch your context and work on that, so you incur some risk. And then the other half is waiting to be done. And so if you have to wait a week, then you have to pay the penalty of, okay, where was I? How's the code base changed now? Did we actually do something to cause defects in this feature now? So I like to bundle stories up. So if the team decides to break a feature down into 10 different stories, and you can say, well, 3 of them make sense to go together as one story, then I would pull in all 3 of those stories, track it as one work item, and then pull it all the way through the system until it was done and released. And that's kind of the approach that I would take.
That makes sense. All right.
Okay, so back to the value stream. So after I ran the game and kind of the workshop for my team, we got a board that looked like this. And I'll show you the physical board after this, but I want to define some terms here. So as you can see, it starts off at the left, and that's the ideas, and that's an infinite queue. So that's where our team puts ideas that we have, or if another team has a request for us to do, that's where they put it. And then it would go to a Robert column. And Robert used to be assessment, but we had my boss, whose name is Robert, had some complaints about he wasn't aware of what was going on the team. So we added this column here. We put some policies on it that Robert had to approve all the work that we were doing, so he could know what the team was doing, and therefore it helped him report kind of up the chain. And then we had the acceptance where we added more user acceptance criteria, behavior-driven development to it. And then we had a grooming session, kind of the last step before we actually start the work, in order to make sure that everybody's on the same page with that work and what the expectations of the software that we were going to be delivering. And that's all the options development that's upstream before we actually commit to work. And then you'll see this big arrow down at the bottom. It says commit point, and in the Kanban community, that's called the Spice Girls question, because it's tell me what you want, what you really, really want. Because the last thing we want is to discard any work that we commit to, because once you add engineering resources to it, that piece of work becomes very expensive to discard. And back in my startup days, when I first started, we put the board up and we saw like 50 things stuck in QA, and that was the first time the organization actually saw all that work that has not been moved through. The lack of maturity in that organization, people were pointing fingers, but the great thing that came out of it was a discussion about, do we need that work? And the answer was no. And so they threw it all out, and we were able to calculate kind of an estimated cost of about $250,000 of work that they did that they discarded. And so we were able to kind of say, we don't want to do that again. How are we going to change the commit point in order to not do that? And then you have the customer lead time, and that's from the customer perspective. That's when they submit an idea until they can actually use it. And then you have the system lead time, and that's the team's lead time. So that's usually from that commit point into the next infinite queue. And for my team, it was the next infinite queue was in that release column. And so we would implement it and do some review of the code, and we had certain policies there, and then we would demo it to the team. And the whole team had to see the demo, because the whole team needs to be aware of what's going on and what's going out and how it works. So if there's an issue and a team member's not around, someone else at least has a general idea of what's going on and can jump in and help. And then the release column was more of a handoff to another team, our change management team. And so we put the whole value stream here so we can understand where the work is. And if anything is stuck, it just stays there. And that kind of raises a flag for us to kind of talk about it. But the options development is super important. And let me go to the next slide, and you can see. So this is our physical board with the options development board. So we actually have two boards that are 4x6 whiteboards. And so the one on the left is this one, the options development. And as you can see at the top, we have the ideas with the infinite queue, and then Robert with 24,12. Well, that 24,12 is min-max width limits. And you can see they get smaller as you go to the right. And that's supposed to create a funnel effect, so you're not working on a backlog of 100 stories and grooming all 100 stories and getting every single detail down for all 100 stories, because there's a high discard rate in this column. We started out with 2 backlog grooming sessions a week, and they were an hour long each, and we would go to the board, and they became more of a discard session, like what are we not going to do? What doesn't make sense anymore? And we track those discards because we were tracking system balance in order to understand, what is our throughput versus how many things are coming in. If more things are coming in than we can actually get out the door, then we're going to be a bottleneck. And we were trying to avoid being a bottleneck in servicing not only the work that we needed to do, but the customers that we were servicing as well, and meeting their expectations. And so you can also see kind of at the top, right under ideas and Robert and acceptance, those are our policies. They're small yellow stickies, and we would put them up there. So whenever a card were to move to done, we would make sure that all those policies were met before we moved the card. And then, of course, we have different color stickies, which may be different types of work or different classes of service or different expectations. So we have kind of a whole key set aside. And then the board to the right is more of the implementation board. It's what we've committed to deliver. And here you can see the implementation at the top and demo, and you can see that implementation has a WIP limit of 2 for both the in progress and review column. And it also has a demo column with a WIP limit of 1. The reason why it's so small is because this is a team of 2, and so we wanted to make sure that people had things to work on in implementation, and then demo was fairly quick, but that's why it only has 1. And then you'll see a few swim lanes here. You'll see service and platform and other non-platform Austin work. And that service swim lane at the top has a WIP limit of 1, and platform has a WIP limit of 2, which as you can see, equals the column width limits. And so whenever you figure out what your width limit is, you can allocate those across your columns, and then you can allocate them across your classes of service or your swim lanes. But for us, that was to handle any requests coming from any stakeholders or customers that were requesting work from our team. And so we had a specific lead time for that, and we could actually go back and look at that lead time and create SLAs and give them some idea of when it was coming out, so they know how to schedule their work and sequence their work. And then the platform swim lane was for our team, because we were creating a lot of demand, because we were building a lot of infrastructure stuff for our microservices and whatnot to serve up data. And so we have that one there. And then we have this other work, non-platform work, and that's kind of a waiting area or an area for seeing other teams' work that we're interested in, and we want to make sure we keep track of it. So during the daily stand-ups, we would go through that as well. And then as you can see, we have release and verify and production, and those were kind of the handoffs that we would do, and we would want to make sure that we go back and verify those things in production once they got released.
So Jay, before we move on to the next slide, I guess a couple of questions that have come up. One is looking at that board. If you go back to the previous one, what are all those stickies that are outside of the board?
Oh yes, so that's our agenda for stand-up. Okay. Those are all the questions that we ask before we start, and so each one agenda item per sticky. And one of the evolutionary changes we made was at the very top, if there's any visitors to our stand-up, we ask them what they need first so they can come and get out. They don't have to wait through the entire stand-up.
Right. And then there's a follow-up question on this. So if you remember, we talked. You talked about taking user stories and making logical bundles that pretty much relate to features, specific
right.
features. So what that essentially means, I guess, is that different features would have different sizes. So some features are 3 stories together, some are 5, and so on. And I guess the question that is coming from the audience is there could you talk about what are the range of sizes and durations of these features?
So it really depends on the feature. Here at DrillingInfo, the features aren't necessarily hundreds of stories big. They're much smaller. Some of them are 5 stories, some of them are 1 story, some of them are 10 stories. And so if you're looking at a list of, say, 50 features, there's something called random branch sampling, where you can take a random set of those things and break them down, and then you can kind of forecast how long that's going to take to actually move through your system based off the observed lead time that you've had. And so kind of back to the delivery rate, that kind of equates to how many stories are you going to get done per week on average, and you can kind of manage your risk and manage the project a little bit better doing that. But for us, a lot of times, probably more than 90% of the time, it was just one of these stickies was a card, and that would come through, and that would be one. If it got to release, that would equate to 1 item delivered for that week. But if we wanted to combine stories together, we would just stick them like basically one on top of each other and move those 3 stories together as 1 item. And when it got to release, that would count as 1 released item, so it wouldn't count as 3.
Right. So if let's say in your context, if a team said there's this feature that has 20 user stories in it, would you think of that as a red flag and try to nudge them in the direction of breaking it up, making it closer to 5? Or would you just kind of say, look, there's a big item and it will not move to done, and so it will have a bigger lead time, and it's okay to have a feature with that many user stories? Yes,
absolutely. I mean, if it doesn't make sense to break it up any smaller, I would pull it all in as 20 items on a board and do all those things. Now there's another strategy where you can actually kind of take those 20 items and run them through a different board. I did this at eBay, where you had the story in one column and then all the tasks or the sub-stories, maybe it was an epic, and then we would run all the stories through one at a time, but we wouldn't pull in another big story. And so you could break it apart and visualize that through your system as well. So there's a whole bunch of different
a follow-up question on the same thread is, did you have a way to normalize the cycle time measurements when you're working with features that are of different sizes?
So I'll kind of get to that with our histogram stuff with lean sheets here in just a second.
Okay. And one more quick question. There's a question around what is there a specific color code to the stickies, or is just you just randomly pick whatever sticky was at hand?
So the board there is kind of the key. So the green stickies were defects, orange stickies were standard work, blue stickies was discovery or learning work that we needed to learn, and so on and so forth. So we put a key up so other people at the board could see what exactly the colors meant.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, this is what our rally board looks like. So it pretty much mirrors what's our physical board. So metrics, everybody loves metrics. So there was a couple ways that we track the metrics, and so I personally like Google Sheets or spreadsheet. The reason why I like Google Sheets is because it has a nice API that I can hook into and grab the data and do the charting with. So I would manually enter that stuff right after stand-up with whatever cards moved. I would enter it into the Google Sheets. And then as this kind of took hold and other people started using it, they would just create a query in Rally and export the data as CSV files and then import it into Google Sheets. And the charts were three basic charts. One was a histogram, one was a lead time run chart, and one was a cumulative flow diagram. And the problem I was encountering was a lot of these electronic tools didn't provide these charts and didn't provide this information. So I wrote a tool to actually do that for me, and it was Lean Sheets. And you can go to it at leansheets.org. And here's what the Lean Sheets cumulative flow diagram shows. Basically, there's a lot more in a cumulative flow diagram. I'm actually rewriting this app because I've learned so much here and learned a lot about these charts, which I'll give you a book at the end of this. But this chart really helps you kind of understand on a specific day how many items were you working on, how many items were in progress in your system on a specific date. And then here's the lead time run chart, and this is a data set that's from December 16, 2015 to February 14, 2016. And as you can see, we have an average lead time, or an average amount of time it takes for a work item to get done as 8 business days. This is all in business days. And then that's the red line, and then the green lines is one standard deviation away from your average. And that's the upper and lower control limits. And this is probably the most popular graph that we have. It's what we're using. Pretty much all the managers are using this to see outliers. So we call an outlier anything that's above that green line, and we want to try to understand, like, why is it an outlier? Why did it take so long? And what we're finding out is people are starting things a lot sooner and not having the dependencies resolved before they start. So it gets blocked and becomes an outlier. And as a result, the behavior is changing to, hey, have all the dependencies been done? Are they almost done? Can we start this yet? So we're looking at the opportunity cost, which has really helped drive improvements. And then the histogram chart, this is what we call the money chart. And some people get confused by when I say that, but really the reason why it's the money chart is because now I can tell you, based on that data set, looking back, I can say, there's an 84% probability that I'm going to deliver work to you once we start it in 14 business days. And that gets you the predictability that everybody seems to want to have. And I've found points don't allow that to happen, but if a team wants to use points, I let them use it, but I track, how long does it actually take, and kind of looking at points versus lead time data like this, an 8-point story is all over the place. It could take 1 day, it could take up to 20 days, I've seen. So I like this chart much better to help do a more probabilistic approach than a deterministic approach. And so Little's Law here kind of helps you build that estimation or the forecast that everybody wants done with this. And this is a real simple algorithm that's averages. In Kanban, they've replaced for software development, they've replaced the arrival rate with delivery rate here. So this is the average delivery rate equals your average WIP divided by your average lead time. And you can use this formula to kind of forecast with your histogram here. So I can use that 14 business days and figure out what our average WIP limit was, what our average delivery rate was, and kind of forecast, okay, how many cards or how many work items is my team going to be able to do in the next quarter? And I can give them an 84% probability, a 50% probability, and a 65% probability. And I know our sales team is doing something similar, so we can put it in the same format that sales has, and it's then rolled up to the executive team, and the executive team really likes it because now they can kind of start understanding what is the capability of our engineering team.
So Jake, a quick question on this topic. How did your sort of senior management or people outside of engineering team react to you guys quoting probabilities of completion as opposed to giving them a specific deadline? Did you see a lot of pushback, or?
From my perspective, it was very well received because now we actually could tell them with a high confidence level of when they could expect something. When I first started here, that was not the case, and it seemed that there was like a lot of blaming and pointing fingers, and that from my perspective again has kind of changed because now we have something called an operations review, which I'll get to, that we kind of set expectations for other teams who are requesting work, and we can use this data to kind of forecast out, projects or features or whatever the business is requesting of us.
So another quick that's coming from the audience, the request is to elaborate what you mean when you're saying that you're making sure dependencies get done prior to starting story. What does that really mean? If you could elaborate.
So if I go back to this histogram chart, I can tell a team that it's going to be 14 days with a roughly 85% confidence or 85% probability chance that you're going to get it in that amount of time. So there's roughly a 15% chance that they're not going to get it in that amount in 14 business days. And what that allows them to do, if they have a piece of work that's dependent on something that my team needs to do, they're not going to start it until probably 14 or 10 business days, 2 weeks out after we start our work in order to not get blocked. They don't want to pull something in and get blocked on it because there may be something that is more valuable that they could do in less time than 3 weeks and get that done. So there's a whole opportunity cost there that they want to take advantage of instead of starting something and then immediately getting blocked or getting blocked 3 days into it.
Okay.
So what I found is we're getting better, and so I've started introducing scheduling and sequencing of work. We've started having more discussions about managing risk by cost of delay and other methods. We've been doing capacity forecasting with Little's Law. There's another tool called Monte Carlo simulations that is probably the best way to forecast things. We started introducing classes of service so we could kind of identify reports and whatnot versus standard work versus high priority work, and making sure we're flowing work more effectively through our systems. Another thing we're introducing is fit for purpose metrics, and that's basically metrics that your stakeholders care about. And so, for example, if they want something fast and they don't care about quality, we're going to focus on that lead time and getting that lead time down and probably removing a lot of quality checks in order to get it in their hands as quickly as possible. And then also we can start allocating our capacity better. So if you have everybody doing Kanban and getting these metrics, you can start using those metrics to say, hey, how do we need to reorg our organization in order to get better performance? And now you have metrics and KPIs to actually see if your reorg had the desired effect. And so to bring it kind of all together, it's this huge feedback loop with seven feedback loops, which I'll go through individually. This may look like a lot, but it's actually a lot of teams kind of combine some of these things into meetings. So let's get started real quick. So daily stand-up, pretty much everybody does this. The team creates the agenda, and it's a placeholder for feedback loop to happen, right, and make improvements, and it's usually customer focused. The replenishment and commitment meeting, and so this is your typical planning meeting that you have your product owner in there, you have the team in there, and you do your typical thing to kind of figure out what are you going to do next. And then you have your delivery planning meeting. For us, that's a weekly kind of get on the train and go out the door. And we're trying to evolve to a continuous deployment. But for now, it's every Wednesday we have a checkpoint to say, here's all the stuff that's going out, here's what we expect, and then the next day it kind of goes out. Risk review. This is, in my opinion, probably one of the most important because there's a lot of teams that have a lot of risk that is hidden. We can't see it. We don't even know it's there. It doesn't have the visibility for the executives to make good decisions about what do they want to do about it. And so usually it's an hour-long meeting on a monthly cadence, but if the team decides they want to do it on a bi-monthly or every 2 weeks or every week, you can do that. A lot of teams try to combine some of these meetings together. But this one, you would go through, if you're tracking all your blockers and your defects, you can kind of categorize them into buckets. And you can start seeing how many days and lead time did it take to solve all the things in each category. And so if you see one category took 120 business days you were blocked on, maybe on and actually not have that blocker happen anymore. And then of course review hidden risk, because teams know what's kind of old legacy code that they don't touch, no one knows. That's usually big risk, especially if customers depend on it. And you can come up with those mitigation strategies. How are you going to mitigate that risk? Are you going to pull any cards in? Are you going to create cards? Are you going to report it back up to your executives? And then you can you review your current work and process limits and your options to kind of know, hey, do we need to make any changes in order to mitigate some of these risks that we're identifying?
So Jay, quick question. When you talk about the cadences, are you essentially doing this on a weekly basis? Do teams commit to stories each week, or what sort of the elapsed time is?
So it depends on the team. Some teams do on demand. So if as soon as they get something done, they have a meeting and say, hey, what are we going to pull next? Some teams do it on a weekly basis. I know one team here does it every Monday. They pull everybody together and they fill up the queue of stuff ready to go. And if there's a change before the next meeting, they make the change on the fly and they go. So it's really up to the team and up to the work. I don't think there's really any one standard thing that fits everybody across the board. But as far as risk review, we're doing kind of monthly for some teams. Some teams aren't doing it yet, so it's kind of I present these options to them, and they kind of decide if they want to do it or not. And then the strategy review. Right now, we're kind of doing this. We have a release planning meeting that's pretty much all of engineering and product once a quarter, and we basically go over what it is the product wants, kind of a status of where we are as a company. But I would like to see it change. That's whether the current market's like. Review all of our metrics again. What is the capabilities of the team, and aligning that strategy, the business strategy, with what the work we're actually doing. That's a great moment to kind of communicate that to the teams. And understanding risk is another big component of that. One of the things I would like to see is more forecasting happening with individual teams, so they can feel confident that what they're committing to, they're going to be able to deliver in the next quarter. And then there's a service delivery review. So you think of your team as a service, and you want to go over those fitness criteria metrics. What do your customers expect, and make sure that those are still valid and that your customers are happy. And you want to discuss the system and design any changes into it if you want. Create those hypotheses, those experiments. Create customer feedback. I know my team, we created a survey to get feedback. And it was super helpful to figure out, are we serving our customers the best way that we can? And then the operations review. I think in kind of conjunction with that risk review, this is probably the most important meeting you can have. And this is basically all the Kanban teams or Scrum teams or whatever get together once a month, and they go over their metrics. And for us, we kind of go over what we did last month, what we're doing the current month, and what were our metrics the last month, and what issues did we run into, and we kind of bring those to the table with all the other management members and kind of discuss, how are we going to make improvements to be better as a team. And that seems to help a ton. And this is what our CTO, Mike Kuvion, had to say about those operations reviews, because he started coming to them, and he really enjoys them as far as I can see, and our new president and COO, Jeff Hughes, has started coming to him as well, and it really is driving a lot of improvements in the organization. So implementing on one team has led to 12 teams gathering these metrics. 6 teams so far are attending the operations review, with the other 6 coming online as soon as they have the data. We have 3 teams have been running it for 3 to 6 months, when we've seen anywhere from about 150% to 225% increase in delivery rate. We have a monthly corporate training for the Get Kanban game. We're tracking arrivals, discards, and blockers. And the CTO is reporting the capability for the capacity forecast to the executive leadership team. And this allows him to kind of get an average cost per card. So now we can kind of extrapolate, if we use that random branch sampling for forecasting, we kind of extrapolate a rough cost for projects and features coming down the pipe from product. And we're also doing some dependency tracking. So once a week we have a status meeting and we have a spreadsheet, and it's our dependency tracking. So we use those lead time histograms to say, hey, well, if we don't start, if this item is needed by X date, then we need to start this with a 50% probability on Y date, or 90% probability on Z date, and make sure that we can have our red, yellow, and green statuses. So it stays green unless you start after your 90% histogram lead time, and that says, oh, now you're incurring risk because you only have a 65% chance because you're starting later. And this provides a really good point for discussion about, maybe it is something that's super small that your team says you can get done in 3 days, so you don't need to start it. But now you have a way to kind of prompt those discussions and make that happen. And so this is kind of where we're getting to Kanban at scale. So as you can see, we have 3 different teams here, or 3 services, and they're all driving demand and moving cards around, and you're observing the capacity and the delivery rate, and understanding how many cards or requests they're taking in a certain time frame. And then finally here, there's one more slide after this. These are the books that I would recommend. The Goal, which has been around for a while, it's mainly manufacturing, but it goes into the theory of constraints. And its counterpart, the Phoenix Project, which looks at the theory of constraints through an IT DevOps perspective, which is excellent as well. And then these 2 books, if you want to know anything and everything about Kanban, read Mike Burrows' book, Kanban from the Inside. Very excellent book. If you want to know anything and everything about those charts that Lean Sheets has, pick up this book by Dan Vacanti, the National Agile Metrics for Predictability. You'll learn a ton of stuff about those charts and what kind of value they would bring to you. And that's it for me.
Yeah, I really appreciate you putting all this together. This is really a very educative and useful thing for me, at least. And I'm seeing, judging by the questions that are streaming in from the audience, I don't believe they're ready to let you go. So I'm going to quickly start, by putting up some of those questions, and let's spend the next 12 odd minutes covering the ground there. So I think I see a few questions which have somewhat of a common thread, and I think that thread is that essentially, is Kanban something that can apply on SDLC, waterfall model as well as Agile, or is Agile a prerequisite to Kanban? How are these things different? And if you were to sort of make a recommendation, would you say that the underlying process ought to be in this shape before Kanban can be applied?
So what I would say is that Kanban can apply to any process that you have. It's really a set of techniques that you can put on top of whatever process you're using. So at eBay, they were very waterfall, but our team used Kanban to process all the work from huge requirements documents. I know here I've been talking to our HR department, and they want to use Kanban for their processes. Sales wants to use Kanban for their sales pipeline. So, I mean, it can be used, these techniques can be used for pretty much any process, all the way from the individual contributor doing a personal Kanban to teams doing it, to a portfolio level, to product using it. I mean, it provides a ton of visibility and whatnot for pretty much any process that you have in your company. Okay. So again, you can use waterfall, you can use Scrum. I would just highly recommend, if you're going to start with what you're doing now, but start adding that lead time metric when you start something and when you finish something, and that will give you a lot of insight to how your team does work.
So in fact, another sort of question in the same flavor was, when you say Scrum team versus Kanban team, is that the same thing? Are you using the terms interchangeably, or essentially, is it up to the teams to decide whether they would want to do Scrum or Kanban, or is it kind of an overlay on Scrum?
So it's up to the teams if they want to use Scrum or Kanban. I know we had one team here that was using Scrum, and they were perfectly happy with it, and I didn't ask them to change or anything. And then they started getting into those time box, the sprint boundary issues with quality and trying to make your sprint and whatnot, and they were getting really stressed out, and quality was tanking. And so what they decided to do, they decided, hey, let's check out this Kanban thing. And so far, they started it back on January 1st, and from what I know, they seem to be improving as they go, and their quality is getting better, because we're following a metric called failure demand, which is the number of defects divided by the number of stories that you're actually doing. And they're looking for a very small failure demand, whereas it was like, at one point, it was 1.5 defects for every story they were doing, and now it's down to, I think, about a third defect for every story they're doing. So there's a key metric there that you can track for quality to see if it's having the desired effect. But you can start doing it for Scrum teams. I've done it for Scrum teams, and all I do is I track when you start things and when you finish things, and it helps you manage the project. And you let the teams continue doing whatever they're doing or whatever rituals they're doing in order for them to feel comfortable with their current process, and you bring the data to the retrospectives and you show them and you have a discussion about it and see if there's any small incremental changes you can make to be better.
All right. So a few more questions, and I'd again encourage our audience to post more questions here. This is great conversation. In case you think of something else after we get off this conversation, feel free to send me an email at ashish.shankar@spinnerzip.com. My email ID is on your screens. So a question for you, Jay, is when you looked at doing this on a big whiteboard versus doing it through software tools, you mentioned Rally. Would you think that interactions are better and collaboration is better when you are around a whiteboard, and did you think that using software sort of got in the way of that collaboration? Or you think that actually facilitated and improved the process?
So speaking from my experience, here at DrillingInfo, we have stand-up areas with a huge 65-inch screen TV that we can bring Rally up, just like having a big whiteboard. If you don't have that, I personally like physical boards. Even if you do have that, I still like physical boards, because physical boards are so much more like customizable. You can do a lot more things with them. And I would have a project manager make it someone's job or rotate the job to update and sync the board to the electronic tool that you're using, because I know a lot of executives like to see that the data that comes out of that. But what I've seen is physical boards seem to have more collaboration around them. But I've also seen a lot of collaboration around our big stand-up areas too. But if you don't have, like I said again, if you don't have that, you're going to miss out on that collaboration and whatnot. But having the board with all the work up there, everything, even all the options and things that are not in progress that are downstream, is super important, in my opinion.
Okay, so I guess another follow-up question that came up was, so essentially what you're saying is that the software is probably better for analytics and reporting, so it does need all the information entered into it, but the whole act of collaborating and coming to agreement as a team, that ought to probably happen around some sort of a physical board.
Yes. And a lot of the tools don't give you the analytics that I want. That's why I created my own app, Lean Sheets. But a lot of the times executives like those dashboards that they see in a tool like Jira or Rally that they know and they understand, and then I present these analytics and these charts to them as well, and then they can decide what they want to trust and go and run with.
So I think we have about 5 or 6 more minutes, and again, I encourage our audience to ask more questions here. One question that's come through is the question of minimum team size. I think you spoke a little bit to the process maturity or team maturity, but does Kanban imply some sort of a minimum team size? If you look at it from or compared it with the agile, you're managing teams and very light process, but in the case of Kanban, you end up having one person kind of dedicated towards running the process and not really doing software development, but essentially driving the process. Is there a PMO kind of thing here?
So yes and no. It depends on the team. I've seen the team not really care about their process and let the project manager kind of take over that. But one thing I try to stress is the team knows the work, and the team understands it more than anybody else. They do it every day, and so I really want them to define their process. What does it take to get their work done, to do their job? And if they care about quality, like one example is that our data warehousing team, I helped them set up their board. They put their policies in place. I went on vacation for a week and came back. There's new policies all around quality. And so, I mean, those kind of little evolutionary changes that help build in to your process kind of organically because the team decided to do that. It wasn't someone who owned the process. So it's more of a collaborative effort on the part of the team in order to improve. They see something wrong, they can change it. It's empowering them. And so I just facilitate them owning their own process, and no one else really owns it. Now the metrics side of things is a little bit different because sometimes you need that one person to own it in order to get the data out of it so you can manage your risk a little bit better.
Right. And then again, the question of how do you do this when teams are spread across geographies? I think you guys also spread across several locations. So does essentially each location have its own Kanban board, and then they kind of input data into a sharing tool? Or
so our Costa Rica team is a good example. They're still doing Scrum, but they're using Rally, and I just export the data out and put it into lean sheets so I can see their performance. There's some teams that are in Ukraine, and they're using Kanban, they're using Rally, they're moving cards through just like a normal Kanban board, and I export their data and bring it into Rally. I did have to train some of these teams, and there's a Get Kanban game online at actionableagile.com, I believe. It's Dan Vacanti's book is his website. They have a Get Kanban game, and so I've kind of adjusted my presentation to be able to do the online game and teach them the basics of Kanban.
And then in your case, do you have essentially teams co-located around features or certain product suites, or how do you sort of manage the geographical dispersion so the Kanban process would work and the co-location and collaboration would work?
Well, I mean, that comes down to kind of the teams, right? So there's one team here that has 3 teams basically, and it's one team in Austin, one team in India, or 2 teams in India, and they kind of work together to kind of move work through. So they have their backlog defined, right? And whenever a team has capacity, they just kind of pick the top one that the product owner has declared this is the highest priority. They pick it and they bring it in and they start doing it. Now they may have set some sort of signal on those cards to say, hey, don't take this one, India team take, the 3rd one down. I'm not sure, but that's kind of how I would manage it. And at the daily stand-ups too, there's no reason why people can't ask, hey, I'm not going to have work today. One of the agenda items is, does everybody have something to do today? And if someone doesn't, we make sure that something is ready to go for them to take if there's capacity in their system to pull it in.
So I think we have 1 more minute, so I might squeeze in 1 more question. When you started with the grassroots, you built out something, you got to the point where it came to the CTO's attention, and do you see senior management now with their behavior sort of morph? Do you see your metrics and screens showing up on their screens and having business decision conversations around these metrics? Do you see any of that at all?
Yes, a little bit. It's kind of slowly getting there, especially with the average cost per card. That's going to be hugely important in forecasting costs for projects, because now if we can actually get that implemented more upstream in the product development lifecycle, we can actually make better decisions about features and products that we want to do, because now we can say, hey, here's 3 products that we're estimating cost X amount of dollars, and here's one that's going to be more than that. But now we can get marketing involved and finance involved and say, hey, if we do these 3, is the revenue going to generate more than doing this 1? And so now we can say, okay, well, if the 3 is more important than the 1, how much would it cost to delay the larger project versus the 3 small projects? And we can start having those discussions and making better decisions about what we're going to actually commit to do from the product and the business.
All right, so we are out of time. I do see several other questions popping up, but unfortunately we're out of time. I'm going to follow up with the people who have posted those questions and try to address them. If you want to continue the conversation, you have Jay's contact information, his Twitter handle, and all that, or you're welcome to send me a note, and we can continue this conversation. This Kanban is a very interesting, exciting, and it's a very deep topic, and clearly it's hard to do justice to it in one session, but I'm completely amazed, Jay, how much ground you covered today, and I really thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
All right, that kind of concludes our webinar today, and thank you everybody for joining in, and stay tuned for the next one in about a month's time. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.